Good morning. I hope you've settled in. If you are still coming in, feel free to work your way again to the front. I'm always offering up these front row seats. I mean, if this was a Taylor Swift concert, people would be rushing the stage, so sorry to disappoint. But we have a great program again today. We have a full schedule. We have two great keynoters happening in here this morning and then again at lunch. And we have 16 breakout sessions. So I would really encourage you to take a look at the agenda today, work your way downstairs, and participate all the way to the end. We really did put on, I think, a spectacular program this year. Before we get going into the session this morning and today's keynote, I want to thank Stoll Reeves again for their sponsorship. They've been a title sponsorship for many, many years. It's at least a decade in the making, so I really appreciate what they've done. And just to recognize their sponsorship, I want to show a short video, so if you would just direct your attention to the screen, and then we'll get started with the program.
Rooted in the West since 1907, Stoll Reeves is a leading law firm providing solutions for complex business challenges. A single-minded focus on excellent client service is at the center of our culture. Collaborating with many voices of different backgrounds creates a better law firm. Let's navigate the future together. Visit stoll.com to learn more.
So I don't know if you're out there, Laura Kerr, Jeff Tishner, I'm not sure if you're there, but thank you again for your support of the conference, and really appreciate what you do for this event. With that, this morning's session is EPA Regional Highlights. I want to introduce Tony Barber. He is no stranger to many of you as a frequent participant in this conference. He's been in the EPA Region 10 for 26-ish years. He currently serves as Director of Oregon Operations, and he's really got some depth to, obviously with 26 years, he's got a lot of depth to his experience, air quality, site remediation, hazardous materials response, and much more. And he's worked on some very interesting projects, such as helping lead cleanup and weaponization anthrax in Washington, D.C. And last year, you may recall, he was on the heels of being on loan in Region 9 with the fires in Hawaii, and now he's serving on the National EPA Transition Team, which I'm sure he'll touch on there. So with that, please welcome Tony Barber.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you all for being here this morning bright and early. And I don't think the mosh pit is set up either, right? So let me clear my screen here. I just wanted to spend a few minutes this morning kind of being somewhat informal. Yesterday, I arrived thinking that the 10-minute session that I had prepared for was adequate, was sufficient for the time, and then I looked at the schedule and reminded myself that it was an hour session. So I added some material information to that, and I think what would make this most meaningful, perhaps not just to me, but to some of you, is to treat it a bit more interactively. And I am foreshadowing right now that the discussion that we can have doesn't have to just start and end today, this morning, or at breaks later today. But the very last slide I have will have my email address and my mobile number. And part of what I see as my duty here in Oregon and in the Northwest is to be available to you so that we can have those conversations whenever you need to have those conversations. So that's what I wanted to say as a preliminary preamble. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about me, because I love to talk about me. I love to be the center of attention. So how many are with me? Show of hands. I mean, the people that feel that way will raise their hands right now, at least in their heart, right? Okay, maybe not. But I know a few of you feel that way. So I grew up very rural, and I almost said, how are y'all doing this morning? Because I grew up very rural in the South, in Arkansas, and my nearest neighbor was my grandma. She was half a mile away. Two sides of our property bordered national forest. We didn't have any neighbors in one direction for probably 15 miles or more. My grandpa was a logger, and in fact, that was really pretty much my first paid job as a teenager was to go out into the woods with my grandpa and work all summer long. And it convinced me of two things. My grandpa was a hard worker, and he earned his pay every day until he was 83 years old. He logged in the forest. And the other thing is that I eventually somehow wanted to go to college. So it's hard work, it's good work, it's needed work, and it's work that some are better suited for than others. I don't know that I was all that well suited for it, but my grandpa took good care of me. I was raised and educated to respect authority and to value good civics and good government. Good civics is important because what does it do? It empowers us to take part in our democracy. It strengthens our communities and keeps us in the know so that we can be part of the public decision-making process. Anything that I talk about, anything that my state counterparts have talked to you about, anything your local government talks to you about, isn't a top-down thing. It's as we disseminate our decision-making to our government representatives. That's the way our system's designed. So good civics fosters that. And we can hold our elected officials accountable and our career officials accountable when we don't do what we're supposed to do. This and a sense of our rights and duties as citizens is really what motivates me. I do care about the environment. I wouldn't have worked at the EPA for 26 years, nearly 27 now, if I didn't care about good stewardship of the environment. I think it's fundamental to our health and well-being as a society, as a people, as an earth. But really, when it gets down to it, what motivates me more than that, perhaps, is to make sure that we're having a fair, free, and level playing field and a good application of good rules and laws in how we approach that stewardship of the environment and protecting people, really, right? So that's what motivates me. And I grew up, and it was especially important growing up in the 70s and 80s. How many people were little kids in the 70s like me? Come on. I said this was going to be interactive, right? So about a third of you, right? And it was a time of great change and uncertainty in the 70s, the 60s, the 70s, and somewhat the 80s. Great change, great uncertainty. How many people remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, right? How many people remember the race riots in the 60s? Oh, I shouldn't ask that. That'll date you. There's at least one hand. Big turmoil, big change, big uncertainty. So why did I join the EPA? This clicker here. The EPA. Anybody know who this is? Do you remember? Okay, I get some laughs there. This is Walter Peck, one of the first EPA exposures I ever had in my life. He came in and he shut down the Ghostbusters. And as an influence, we have all sorts of things as kids as we grow up, right? You don't know what's what. You don't know what's over in the next town over. You don't know what's across town sometimes. Sometimes you don't know why your parents are doing things, what government is, why it exists, all that stuff, right? So Walter Peck came in and shut down this good, productive business enterprise, right? The EPA did that. So I thought all my childhood, growing up, probably through a good portion of college, after I'd served in the military, the EPA's job was to kill business and to hurt people. And I didn't understand it all. I thought it was, some very far out extreme organization that was quasi-government and probably collaborated with the Illuminati and the crab people. I don't know, right? So imagine my surprise after working. I did some internships after I got out of the Navy. Went in college. I went and worked for Boeing for a while, and then I went and worked for Procter & Gamble for a while, and I thought, this is great. I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to make a lot of money, too. And I'm going to help people have the products and services they need. And then I realized those unpaid internships didn't pay my bills. And so I found an opportunity at EPA for an internship in air quality as a chemical engineer. And it was a paid internship, which was great for two reasons. One, it paid my bills, and the second reason was that it would give me an insight into my enemy and how I could approach defeating them ultimately as a private entrepreneur. Okay? So I've set the stage for my career of 27 years now, almost in the EPA. Well, I found out that the people at EPA, by and large, weren't Walter Peck. I found out that, by and large, they were not only well-meaning, but hardworking. And I found out that the mission of EPA was much more in line with my values than I had thought. We work hard to protect people and to be good stewards of the environment. And it appealed to the good civics, the good government element that I was raised with, that says, you know, we have a say in how our laws are written and how our regulations come down and how they're implemented. And there's a two-way street, there's an open door with the regulated community and with the public in general who are potentially harmed or benefited by the regulated community. So we can talk, so we can compare notes, and so we can see the common humanity among us all. So I joined the EPA after that fairly negative opinion and found out that not only is it a place I could tolerate, but it's a place that I thought I could make a difference. Because I gave you some great things about EPA, but I'll tell you some bad things in my entrance to the EPA that I learned. In 1997, when I came to the EPA, I had worked for 7 years as a nuclear engineer prior, and I'm a big fan of nuclear energy. I just am. I think it's safe, reliable, healthy, good for the environment, good for the trade-offs that it provides. And I came to the EPA, and about 95% of the people at EPA said nuclear power is satanic. It's evil. And they also, a lot of them at that time, didn't really understand agriculture and some of the other industrial sectors that we had, that we still have, thankfully. And a lot of them had the attitude that they needed to find the bad actors among our agricultural producers and our other industry producers. And the mindset was that most people would try to get away with whatever they could get away with, and they were not going to voluntarily do the right thing. And I would say that over time, I've seen my opportunity to bridge between people that think like that and the regulated community and the people that think like I do, which is most people are more or less inherently trying to do good. Left to our own devices, we want our children to have clean air, clean water, safe places to play, safe places to go to school, good food to eat, nutrition, right? For example, all that don't agree with that, please just, I'd love to raise your hand. Raise your hand because I want to talk with you later, because I may learn something that I didn't know. So I don't see any hands, so I guess I'm right. So I felt like I could bridge between people that thought that way. And I would say today, about 90 to 95% of my colleagues at EPA think nuclear power is probably a pretty good idea. And almost 100% know that food doesn't come from the grocery store, it comes from farms. And they know that the one bad actor out of 500 or whatever is someone we do have to deal with. And as we shift from having an enforcement mindset to a compliance assistance mindset so that we can be the good steward of the environment, then we'll be better off in the end, rather than trying to penalize and demonize people. So I came through that period. I was pretty uncertain what that change meant to me. It was a great period of change and uncertainty in the 90s as I went through the military, through college, joined the EPA. I didn't know what was going to happen, who was going to be in power, what rules were going to change. We had all sorts of air and other regulatory measures. The Superfund Authorization and Reauthorization Act came along, and so I went into the 2000s, and what happened about 2001, about 3 months ago, 2001, 9/11 happened, and the world changed. No longer can you see your family member to the gate at the airport. We're entering a period of great change and great uncertainty. And as I worked then in the field of response to hazardous material incidents, I ended up cleaning up, I think I heard Greg's great, right? Can everybody give Greg a hand? I don't think he gets enough credit. He's awesome. But I think he said I weaponized anthrax. I don't know what he said. I helped clean up weaponized anthrax in the Capitol. So I was one of the 2 night shift supervisors at the Hart Senate building. And I like to say that I've been in more senators' offices than most senators have. None of them were there, thankfully, because they would have had to have been in level A or level B. And some experiences there. I tell you what, having been in the Navy, I worked a lot with some Marines. I had 200 Marines with the CBRF, the Chemical Battalion, the Chemical, Biological, Radiological Force, CBRF, and they would come and help us do things. And so one day they headed up. They were going to, I think, the 5th floor in the Hart Senate building, and they got up there all in their chemical protective suits, biological protective suits, and they said the door's locked. This big office door, this big mahogany office door. And I said, okay, hang tight. I'm sending somebody in with the keys so they can let you in. So we had somebody suit up real quick, take the keys in. Well, in the 4 minutes or so, by the time that our runner got suited up, entered the hot zone with the keys, what did a Marine do? What do you think the Marines did? They kicked in a $5,000 door. And that was only the beginning. So I've learned a little bit about waste, fraud, and abuse in the government and about managing Marines. So any Marines here? Any at all? I know I saw one yesterday. I see somebody pointing. I can't see the lights. Where is he? Oh, there he is. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about then, right? Yeah. So for the past decade and a half, I've been involved with NEBC and other conferences like it, and the bridge building aspect, the community of us together with disparate views, disparate jobs, and disparate experiences, very often have a very common mission. That's to provide livelihood, health, and well-being for our communities, right? So I think, through the 2000s, we experienced changes in presidential administrations. We experienced changes in how our society interacts and protects our privacy and so many things. So all those changes produced what in us, I think, as a society? It produced uncertainty. What's the future hold? We had 2 wars going on in the East, the Middle East. We had a lot of things going on elsewhere. And I just think that the 2000s produced a lot of anxiety, change, and uncertainty in our lives. And we got to 2008 for me, and I kind of reached a point where I thought I needed to move to something a little bit more relaxing than being called out at 3 o'clock in the morning every 3rd or 4th night. So I did that, and I wanted to just talk to you. I want to transition to a view. I don't know if it'll show up very well, but the workforce at EPA. And this is from the beginning of EPA, so this is 54 years. Gives you an idea of how our workforce has changed since the inauguration of EPA back in '70 and all the way till now. And you can see some fluctuations. And what do we have every 4 years? We have an election. a presidential election. So I thought it might be interesting to show you what it looks like if you see those presidential transitions and workforce. Now, this is maybe a correlation, but you can't have a definite cause identified here. But it's interesting to see, I think, the different parties, it's obvious blue and red, that were in power and how EPA's workforce changed. So when a presidential election happens, we often don't know what's coming. They can say all they want. And how do you know if a politician is lying? Yeah, their lips are moving. Yeah. And now there's ventriloquists. Politician ventriloquists, right? They don't even have to move their lips sometimes. So I just wanted to mention that, and I want to mention a little bit more about, EPA's budget. So EPA's budget has climbed over the years, and some of that would be expected because of cost of living or cost of doing business. And I also have that broken out by their presidential administrations. One thing that's kind of counterintuitive in some discussions would be the idea that EPA's workforce and EPA's budget have very often done better in Republican administrations than in Democrat administrations. That's not what you would necessarily hear. That's not always true either, but it's an interesting point. So this year and in 2010 were our last year I should say, and in 2010 were our highest budget years. But there's something called has anybody heard of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the so-called Inflation Reduction Act? I'm not going to get on a soapbox about the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, but what it is another infrastructure law. It's a grant program, largely grants and loans that provide a huge amount of infrastructure. And Greg and I were talking earlier about infrastructure and what counts as infrastructure. A lot of things are included in that. And certainly relevant to this group, all the water infrastructure that many of you work on, all the cleanup, the brownfields, the reuse programs that many of you address, all the wetlands banking, so that mitigation for wetlands and other things that need to be dealt with can be done in a good way are kind of considered infrastructure. So I just wanted to point this out, that EPA's budget, you see down there in the low part, is only about $10 billion, give or take. But these laws for 5 years running added $18.3 billion on average per year. So it tripled our budget. It didn't triple our workforce. We have people who for 2 years have been doing nothing but twice the normal grants that they would manage. They're just trying to get them out the door. I sat here, I think I was sitting 2 years ago, and I referred to this as a drunken spending spree. That's pretty controversial to say that. But the reason I say that is because EPA's mission, my mission, our colleagues' mission, is to make that a sober program of efficient, rapid application of those funds in ways that are meaningful and make a difference to people. Is that fair? Okay. So here we are in 2024. Our staff is almost as high as it's been. Oops. I got too many buttons here. But I wanted to say for a minute, well, do I want to say that? If I catch up. Oh, come on. There we go. So the task in the last 3.5 or so years under the Biden administration has been to ensure that we apply our funds, and programs in that rapid, efficient, and sober manner. One of the things that we wanted to do, going back to good civics, is to make sure that as many Americans as possible could take part in that. And some organizations, some communities, they may never have applied for a grant in their life. They might not even be able to spell grant. But we want to help make sure that they are part of this picture. Can you bring that back up there? So this is a map of our Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers. And there's a lot of different colored dots on there, but the ones with the circle on them are, I think, 17 technical assistance centers across the country. There are 2 in the Northwest, one in Seattle at University of Washington, and one here in Oregon, in Portland, that in partnership with the Willamette Partnership and others, we have it there. So you can put that back now, but excuse me. Our technical assistance centers, well, I want to go back for a second about the large dollar value, right? $1,000 per household, roughly. About $261 per every person in the United States is what that infrastructure package represents. And over 5 years, it's a lot of money. So when we talk about our TIC-TACs, anybody ever heard of a TIC-TAC, a Thriving Community Technical Assistance Center? We want to make sure that those folks have help in the communities that are not sophisticated in applying for grant money, but they do need the infrastructure help, the other help that these funds provide. And some of those are historically marginalized or underserved people, and we want to make sure that they're taken care of. That's urban, rural, tribal, could be anyone. I got to click twice. I wanted to spend a minute and talk to you about some things here in the Northwest about EPA that we've been doing, and hopefully this will be meaningful to you too. Some of the money in the bipartisan infrastructure law and other appropriations ended up putting $72 million last year into the Columbia River Restoration Act. It's a lot of habitat restoration, toxics reduction, education, and the like. So we're working hard on administering those funds and in partnership with those groups, along with the Columbia River Toxics Reduction Working Group. Some of you are probably members or participants with that as well. In the Portland Harbor site, we're rapidly approaching a 30% design, so the cleanup there can go forward. I'm 100% positive a dozen or more of you have a piece of that work, and so thank you for your work on that to make here at home, in our backyard, my backyard at least, a clean and safe place to be. Let's see, Bristol Bay, Pebble Mine. On the 30th of January last year, almost 2 years ago now, EPA blocked the Pebble Mine under the Clean Water Act using unacceptable adverse effects clause for salmon fisheries. And so that was only the 14th time in history that EPA has used that clause. And so the mining company and I think Alaska, the state of Alaska, may have appealed that and lost in the Supreme Court subsequently, so I think that is a done deal. So that occupied a lot of our time over the last, 10 years. Let's see, transboundary mining, we're putting about $2 million into grants for transboundary mining from Alaska, Washington, Idaho, and Montana. So we're working hard to grapple with what happens when the effects of mining in Canada crosses the boundary south or west in Alaska's case, or reverse mining in the United States affects Canadian resources. So got about $2 million of grant program. You can get up to, I think it's maximum of $600,000. If your organization wants to participate in that, I think it's, January 17th is the deadline for applying. I would say that our Puget Sound program is growing as well. It's very well funded nowadays, and since 2006, they've restored over 56,000 acres of aquatic and contributing shoreline habitat. We continue to work pretty hard on that, and I would say that there is a Puget SOS Act. I don't know what the SOS stands for, but one of them is sound, obviously, that might stand up a separate Puget Sound office separate from EPA Region 10, but that's still being discussed. One of the things that we're working on here in the Northwest is nitrates in groundwater that's used for drinking water. So Yakima Valley, the lower Yakima Valley, and the lower Umatilla Basin are two of our focus areas for that, two of the big areas that we're really paying attention to, and we're glad that our partnership with the states in those cases and some of the industry folks is starting to pay some dividends, at least in terms of what we feel like we're preventing people from being exposed to begin with by providing alternative drinking water, and to get down to the brass tacks of how we reduce the quantity of the concentration of nitrates in drinking water that people are depending upon is making progress, but that's a long, long road. And then lastly, I wanted to mention Warm Springs. Year before last, toward the end of the year, EPA and Indian Health Service provided, I think it was $23 million to build a new water treatment plant. And one of the things that here in the Northwest we're very committed to, we have almost half of the nation's tribal entities. Our tribes here are 271 out of the over 500 tribes in the country. And so we take our commitment and our treaty trust responsibilities to our Native Americans very seriously. And this is one of the follow-throughs with that, to make sure that they are able to have, again, good drinking water. What else is here? So I wanted to talk about presidential transition. I thought perhaps this might be the most interesting thing I could possibly talk about because although you all know that we have elections every year, you might not know how the transition of power is supposed to go. One of the exciting things for me is that I got selected to be Region 10's transition coordinator for the national team for EPA. The person that had done it a few times before she'd retired, and so Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. This will be my 8th administration as a federal employee and my 7th transition, but it's the first time I've gotten to see a little bit of the inside baseball stuff with transition. So when a new president's elected, they designate and send an advance team to each agency so that we can work together with them. So we brief them up. We did, at EPA, we did over 200 briefing papers back September and October. We have a calendar of events for the first 100 days of the new presidency. And yet, if you've been following the news, you know that there are 4 major agreements that the new administration typically signs with the White House. There's an ethics pledge, there's a GSA agreement, and what's the other one? DOJ, Department of Justice. So those are all oriented toward, can they get funding for their transition team? Can they get office space to get a laptop for their people? You know, do they get access to the network? Do they get ID? Do they get a background check? All that stuff associated with employment, basically. And those were all delayed. And in fact, one of them, the GSA agreement, apparently will not ever be signed. But they've got workarounds, and they're not all required. Most of what the Presidential Transition Act and the process is geared toward is that the incumbent administration has to follow through with and transition and afford those opportunities to the incoming. The incoming has much less responsibility on the transition side of things. So we've only just now, I think it was Friday, I learned that there is a singular Trump administration transition team member whose paperwork is at DOJ to get vetted and get background checked. So I'm thinking that maybe tomorrow or the next day we'll find out who that might be. By now, normally, we have a team of 10 or 15 people sitting in D.C. or flying to other places in the country or talking to us and asking questions and telling us things, and we haven't had that yet. So we're roughly a month behind schedule, if you think about things that way. So I'm pretty excited to learn the opportunities and the challenges that we're going to have with the new administration. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what those opportunities and challenges might be. How many of you like to speculate? Yeah? Yeah, at least one hand over there. I don't know if any, speculation is fun, isn't it? We all like to speculate, even if in our own mind, but it can sometimes not be productive. So there's a lot of speculation about what the new administration is going to have in it. I guess I would say to begin with that there's a few things that we do know, or that we can certainly expect. We can expect change, and we're very uncertain. Hey, does that sound like a theme? Change and uncertainty. I think it does. Well, at any rate, the future looks like this. We don't know. But I think some of the things we can depend upon is that compliance assistance versus enforcement is a focus area that we'll see again. We saw that in the first Trump administration. Not that we're not going to do enforcement, but that we are likely to emphasize the role of helping people who mean well but don't get there to get to the finish line of compliance. We'll probably be doing a hard look at grants. There's still, billions and billions of dollars potentially still available, but how we distribute that remains to be seen in the Trump administration. And I think one of the themes that we've heard time and time again in the previous administration and in campaign talks from the Trump administration is shifting power, authority, say, back to the states. And previously that's been called things like cooperative federalism. So my encouragement to our state colleagues is to lean into that. If you have perspectives, if you have interest in influencing environmental policy, well, test the administration on their commitment to that, to states' directions. I had another thought I was going to share. Oh, I don't want to call her out, but one of our friends here, a long-term participant in NABC, said yesterday that it's really important that government try to serve the business community as much as anybody else. And I'm kind of paraphrasing what she said, but she said she's not hearing that from any government entity. So I wanted to correct that by saying that I believe, as EPA's Oregon director, that it's really important that government, especially my agency, do our best to serve the business community. And what that means to me is a level, like I said before, a level playing field, clear, certain regulations, consistent answers. And I'll tell you a little story about early on in my career. I sat across a cubicle wall from another person. I did oil facility spill prevention inspections, as did he. He'd been around, I think, more than 30 years in that job. And I was a year in that job. And I would hear him answer the phone. I'd hear the question from the person, the regulated entity on the other end of the line. They'd ask him a question, and he would proceed by his memory from maybe what the rule was 25 years ago to tell them very incorrect information. And information that if they were inspected based on that, would get them in trouble. And so I tried every time I had some index cards, and I'd write on there the citation for where they could find the right information, and I would pass it over the wall to him. And so I would hear him sometimes ignore me, and sometimes he would say, "Oh, I just remembered." And so I think it's good. Sometimes I know regulated entities shop for answers, and there's a reason for that, because sometimes they don't get the right answer the first time. And sometimes it's because they get the right answer the first time and they didn't like it. But you got to do your own research too. And hopefully people are giving you the citation so that you have something concrete to back it up. So again, certainty is good, but we're faced with uncertainty and certainly change, right? So I'm going to wrap up soon. But I think there's a session, was it yesterday or today, on AI? I went to the one last year. And Google has AI, right? Can you put that up on the screen, please? I wanted to share this with you. This is Google's AI on how to deal with change and uncertainty. So generative AI can be really helpful. So here it says, change and uncertainty are both natural parts of life, and while they can be unsettling, they can also present opportunities for growth. So reframe your mindset, embrace uncertainty. It can lead to personal growth and new experiences, new beginnings. Use trend analysis, expect the best. Communicate more and develop your strengths. That's Google in my hand, give me the answers I demand. Right? So I wanted to finish by saying this, that we're getting ready for a transition to the Trump administration, but we are still, as a federal agency, as are all the other federal agencies, working for the current Biden administration. And our commitment is till January 20th at 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon on the East Coast, that we are following the orders that we're given. We're following the executive orders, the mandates that we're supposed to do. And at that transition point, we will follow the orders that we're given, the executive mandates and the directions that we're supposed to follow. So that's our job as a civic service, civil service organization. Our job is not to be activists. Our job is not to be taking sides in the law beyond what our laws and regulations say. So I want to encourage you with that. And then this last slide, I told you I'll give you my cell phone number. My email's up there. I probably won't change my cell phone number for a while, so give me a call. Any questions? I did perfect, Greg. Answered all their questions. Uh-oh.
Oh, gosh.
I meant any questions but from you.
Thank you for your discussion today. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, if you've been through this, you did on your hand, all the administrations. We had Trump 1. We're going to Trump 2. Are there any comparisons that you can speak to with the transition process?
Well, one thing that we're noting immediately, even though the bureaucratic part of the transition is delayed, we're noting, as many of you probably have, that the process of identifying and nominating political appointees is blazing fast compared to other transitions. And with the, I don't know what the establishment or potential establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency will mean, but that's exciting. My personal opinion, I've heard other people say this, so I adopt it rather than come up with it. I think Elon Musk is going to get bored within a couple weeks and go do something else. He may fly to Mars and back, I don't know. But I think Vivek, and I never say his name, Ramaswamy, I think, is going to be there for the long haul and is going to dig into the idea of government efficiency. And comparing to the previous Trump administration, there was a big emphasis on lean management and lean processes, doing, you can compare it to Six Sigma or many TQM or any of the other sort of leaning processes but it was pretty pervasive throughout government for lean management to be an emphasis, and I see that for sure as maybe branded a little differently, but that's going to be a big emphasis, I think. I think too, one of the things that we saw in the previous Trump administration that we'll probably see in this one, I'm just speculating, my opinion, not EPA's, is an emphasis on land cleanup, through the Brownfields program, the Superfund program, we experienced expedited cleanups and more funding for remediation. Even if other programs were curtailed or cut back, the cleanup programs, the land programs were accelerated to some degree under Trump's administration, and I think that's probably likely as well. Yes, ma'am. Right up here. I don't know if. Boy, have you all? I'd encourage you, if the lights are still on a break, just come up and experience this. Especially those, like I said, who would like to be the center of attention. If you want to come up and I'll watch you, I'll pay attention. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation and discussion. It was really great. Just wondering, with this lean management and the new administration, is there a concern that there'll be a reduction in EPA workforce?
So there's certainly concern, right? And our budget and our workforce numbers, our FTE, which is part of the budget, can be affected, and I would imagine it probably will in some way, and probably not in a well, it depends on your perspective, but not in a good way in the sense that might be a reduction in the workforce. Couple things I'm thinking about is, one, we've had a plan in place knowing that things like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act and other funding has a sunset to it. So we have a glide path already that we were starting to work on a year and a half ago on how we would ramp down our workforce regardless of who won the election. So in a Harris administration, our workforce would also probably have gone down a bit. So that's one context, because all the grant management workload that we've had and will have through 2026 will come to an end at some point, unless there's a big additional influx of funding. So the other thing we're, frankly fully expecting is January 20th, January 21st, we'll get a hiring freeze. That's common, not in every administration transition, but in almost all of them. They say, hey, we want to get a handle on what you're doing. We don't want you to hire anymore until we figure out where we're going and how big we want your workforce to be or how small we want it to be. So they'll say, stop what you're doing. If you don't already have an offer out to somebody, then don't extend one yet. So I think that's very likely. So my crystal ball is very cloudy, but I see a few shapes there. Thanks. Anyone else?
I have a question regarding your comments on nitrate.
Yes, sir.
And what is the role of the EPA compared to Oregon on that? If you have to define that.
Yes.
You're giving closet water.
Yeah. So his question was, what's EPA's role in the context of nitrates and groundwater use for drinking? So we really have very limited authority, but under Section 1411, I think it is, of the Safe Drinking Water Act, we can do an emergency order if there's imminent and substantial endangerment determined. So that's pretty much the limit of our significant authority. We also have resources. For instance, I think it was Morrow County, we gave $1.7 million to help them assess, and we lend our technical review and expertise to things like Oregon's plan that they issued in September, I think, with Oregon Health, DEQ, and Oregon Department of Ag has a joint kind of plan on how they're going to attack the lower Umatilla Basin. So we lend our expertise, and we have quarterly meetings with that group of people and review their actions. I guess my read on that is that as long as they're doing a sufficient job by some measures in addressing it, then we don't enter into the area where we would apply our emergency order authority to take action. So we are a cooperating partner, not an authority, unless we go to that sort of a nuclear option. Does that answer your question? Yeah, thanks. Anybody else?
A question over here in the corner by the coffee.
Oh.
And just wondering, based on your last iteration with the Trump administration, how much influence or action can they take on rulemaking? So do they, I'm not sure how rulemaking works at EPA, but can Trump just walk in and, tear everything up and say, hey, here are the new rules?
I'm trying to think about how to answer that question. It's not that I'm reluctant at all. It's that I might be almost as ignorant as, forgive me, as you on that. And I think sometimes, not just with Trump, but many other presidents in the past, they try it and see if they get away with it. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Executive orders can be written that are not consistent with the law, right? And so, or they may be. They can through the administrator of EPA, who has been named, that's Zeldin, as at least as a nominee. Influence from the Trump administration can cause direction on how fast or slow how resourced we make something. So one way to slow something down is to say, you 4 people that are working on that regulation, well, 3 of you are now working over here on this other thing. And so effectively that might slow it to 1/4 or so of its previous pace. Or vice versa, resources can be shifted to a project to speed it up. There are few things, I think, that are written in law by Congress that the president can say, absolutely not, we're just not doing that, because it is a mandate of the elected officials in Congress. But there probably are some things that way. I'm just kind of ignorant of it. I think in my next 27 years at EPA, that's what I'm going to learn. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes? I'll repeat. Oh, she's right behind you there.
Thank you. Appreciated this discussion and your theme on uncertainty and that this isn't new to us. Wanted to see, I appreciated your slide too, of what the future might look like. Based on your experience with 8 presidential transitions, how would you say how you feel right now about the change and uncertainty that may be coming? How does that compare relative to past transitions? Is this kind of just the normal, or is this maybe something new and different?
So there's my personal take on it, irrespective of politics or partisanship, and that is, I'm a fairly big fan of Franklin Covey's Leading Change and Change Management series of seminars. And one of the things we learn in that setting is that no matter what the change is, there are people who are quick adopters. They just launch right in. There are people who minimally do so and kind of do the minimum to go along with the change. There are people who are neutral and wait and see. There are people who resist it. And there are people who just quit and drop out, right? And in 2017, in January, our human resources officer in the Northwest quit. She said, I can't do this. I don't want to deal with this. So I stepped in for a year in that role and talked with a lot of people about how they experienced that change. And there's a spectrum, right? Not just based on what their ideologies are or their preferences in government, but how they want to experience status quo versus any change. And so I personally, whether it was Biden coming into office or one of the Bushes or Trump coming to the office, I'm kind of excited about it. I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and I would say that my personal preference is to launch right in and give it a try. And so that's where I come. If it was a Harris administration, I'd feel the same way. So personally, that's my disposition. Politically, I am prohibited from talking about partisan elements in a setting like this. So I'd love to give you my political opinions, my partisan opinions, but I can't do it. So How is that? One quick one.
Over the years, we've had different contaminants come out over your career and mine because of our age. PCBs, dioxin, asbestos, and now PFAS is starting to sweep across the country. What do you see happening nationally and then within Region 10 with that?
So nationally, PFAS now is a hazardous substance with some attention to fine-tuning some limits on PFAS contamination in various media and drinking water and elsewhere. I think that will continue. I think there's some effort nationally to get EPA to rescind the determination that PFAS and perfluorinated compounds are hazardous, but I don't think that's going to succeed. I think it's going to remain as a hazardous substance. We are working in Region 10 on some things that I think will set some groundwork for how we model and assess PFAS in the natural environment. In fish tissue, for instance, we've been doing research here for the last couple of years on sampling and analysis techniques to determine bioaccumulation in the food chain. And I think that's an element in the Northwest that we kind of see transferring knowledge to other parts of the country. I would say that maybe 2-3 years ago, we were looking at Oregon, for instance, as we don't really have much PFAS here. There's just not a concern. And taking us now 2 or 3 years later, we're seeing that it's much more ubiquitous than we thought before. And so I personally see the future of PFAS being kind of like the future of asbestos was back, 60 years ago or less. But it's taken a very long time to get asbestos out of commerce and to find ways to address it that are meaningfully protective. And I kind of feel like PFAS is on that same sort of track. So I don't know if I fully answered your question, but that's kind of my thoughts on it. And we can talk more if you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. You filled up that hour really well, so job well done. Thank you for participating. We've had a great turnout, some great discussions this morning. I think it really kicks off and sets the tone for the day. With that, we have about 30 minutes, so if you haven't taken time to visit the exhibitors here today, I would encourage you to do so. They're a big part of the conference, and their support is very much appreciated. So we will see you back in this room for the keynote at lunch. Thank you.